It's on. So Tim,
Oh, so I actually do it from here, like normal?
Yes.
Throw the first slide up.
and let's just double check that CJ's got something on YouTube.
The only thing I got on YouTube is the link. So it must have generated a new link.
Maybe,
If it did that, we're gonna need to repost that link.
yeah, on Facebook.
Yep.
Can you do that?
I'll leave it.
My daughter requested one slice of pizza at my home, so I'm like,
You take 3 or 4 slices. No, really?
one's all she needs.
No.
I mean,
Email it
one's
to
all
me,
she
or I
needs.
guess.
Okay.
She's that person. She's a half a brownie kind of person, half a cookie. I don't.
Deke says he's flying all evening, so.
Is what?
He's flying all evening, he can't talk. Nice of him to get back
So
to.
he's on the milk run. Yeah, you get to do the pass.
CJ, the link's coming right now.
Okay.
Pass goes.
And it's coming on email?
Yeah, come on.
And we're live on that link, so.
Who are we talking
Right at D, Jonathan D.
Pilot training vehicle, G17.
Yeah, he's
There you go.
Q400 pilot.
Now, can he be, so he should be audible on that too?
Should be.
So do we turn off and on the volume? I mean, the sound, or is it just always on?
Sound, this is off. The mic should be on.
There's nothing on this link.
It's not working.
There it is.
Colin's probably wondering where the hell I am.
I'm sorry, John, but
I said I need to make a phone call when I'm like, I'm just gonna go.
I can make a phone call. In Wyoming.
Let's see if I can get this sim to go inverted. Or does he still have an engine failure on the ground?
No,
he
you did a good job. Did that one work?
working on it, man.
Have you flown that sim before?
No, I haven't actually. Have you?
That was his guinea pig and did the whole full thing.
Oh, really? I've been in it.
I've been in it.
Yeah, I've seen it, but I've never flown it.
It's, I'm sure that it's working.
Okay,
Yeah,
you got,
it's live.
you got extra screens on the,
See you again tomorrow.
can you get rid of the side
Oh, yeah,
stuff?
we're at lunch.
Well, not me, because, I gotta go coordinate and fly from 12 to 4.
I'll save you some for dinner.
Okay, save me a piece.
That's what we'll have for dinner. I'm sure we'll have leftovers.
Yeah,
Is that better?
If not, I'll make sure you get one. How's that?
Dave Rath is leaving this weekend for Florida. So I'm setting up, he's supposed to bring a laptop there so I can set up Jepson on there, so he's gonna update data while he's gone. Tomorrow morning.
Who's fun with him? Jason.
Jason. He sent us an email or texted me this afternoon.
It's one there.
Thank you.
Alright, we're gonna just roll right into it.
I'm gonna get out of this full time.
So people can hear whatever's said as we right
So you guys can do this.
He doesn't need me.
Got it. 10 or 15 second
delay.
delay.
So if Tim's over there, I can sit over here.
Big faces.
Alright, you guys have fun.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your patience. Those of you that have signed on and have walked through the menagerie of our links to get to our presentation this evening. I do want to take a few moments just to let you know that with all the chaos that's going on, we are still committed to delivering a quality experience for all of our WPA members. The FAST program is a phenomenal opportunity for us to continue to hone our skills and certainly share great information with each other. Tonight I'd like to take a few moments to introduce Mr. Tim Lewis from the Northwest Flight School here. He's going to be sharing with us about fall and winter weather preparedness. And we're going to go right through this. If you folks have questions, you can certainly type some information into our system there and or email, and we'll be able to get back to you. And we look forward to a great experience tonight. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, CJ. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Mostly we can blame this on Mike Foster if it doesn't go well. Today I've got a presentation put together for you that I've titled Fall and Winter Weather Preparedness, but really it's going to be a little bit of aeronautical decision making and a little bit of weather presented in a little bit different way than maybe what you're used to. So let's just get right into it. The picture that you're looking at now I found in my travels around the country recently, and it's a sweatshirt. I didn't buy it, only because they didn't have my size. A little bit about me. I'm an aircraft owner. I've been a pilot since 1989. I learned to fly in college, working at a liquor store to pay for it. And I've been fortunate enough to find a couple of great partners, and we are in the middle of owning our Cirrus. I'm now a flight instructor and have been for the last 5 or so years with Northwest Flight Service. One of my goals when I set out was to specialize in the Cirrus brand, and I was recently awarded Platinum CSIP. That CSIP stands for Cirrus Standardized Instructor Pilot. And Platinum indicates the level of training and experience that I have and expertise that I have on the make and model. So that was a recent addition to my list. As I said, I work for Northwest Flight Service here at Phelps Field, and a little plug for ourselves. We do maintenance, rental, training. We are here in the building that's alongside Western Aviation. And yes, I did say maintenance. We do offer maintenance. We have our own maintenance shop on the west end of the field. And so you may or may not know this, but you do have a choice for maintenance at Spokane Phelps Field. We are going to be moving out of the Phelps Flight Center. You may have seen our announcement recently about our new construction that's going to be starting in January, hopefully. And we'll have a move-in of sometime next summer. And that'll be where the FSDO building used to be, right next to the tower. And we'll be consolidating all of our operations, maintenance, training, and rental in that new building next to the tower, just to the east side. And the new building's going to look something like this. So as I said, Mike invited me to come over and talk tonight, and I thought it would be great to talk about holding patterns and detailed analysis of such things, but that wasn't what he asked me for, so maybe next time, or maybe never. I know how much everybody loves holding patterns. I love holding patterns, and I love crosswind landings too. But let's talk about accidents and incidents. This is actually a bit of data that I got recently at I'm the FAST team, one of the FAST team local reps, and I was at a meeting with our program manager, and this was some of the recent FSDO information that the Spokane FSDO is reporting. Now, Spokane FSDO comprises all of eastern Washington and northern Idaho. So these statistics you're seeing are coming from a lot of area, not just Spokane, but this is the Spokane FSDO. 14 accidents and 14 incidents in the year-to-date 2020. But what I want to point out in this slide is the fact that the average annual hours of the pilots involved in these accidents and incidents, the average annual, that's the correct number, 12 hours was the annual hours of the pilots involved. And the next line there, the lowest annual hours of any pilot. Any guesses? 2. The lowest annual hours of any of the pilots involved in the 14 accidents and 14 more incidents was 2. Now, I can't imagine that anyone that flies 2 hours in a year is going to be very good at it. And that is probably why this person was involved in whatever it was they were involved in. And we're going to talk a little bit more about things that happen when you don't get very good at what you do. You're looking at a picture of what my chief pilot dubbed the retractable decathlon. This was in Rock Springs, Wyoming on a trip I made 2 weeks ago across the country. And I found this airplane parked alongside the FBO in the gravel there, and we can only imagine that what reason, I never did ask, but we can only imagine what could have happened. Maybe it was weather, maybe it was some sort of mechanical failure, but most of the pilot accidents and incidents are caused by the pilot, not the plane. So my guess is that there was probably some proficiency issue here, and while I don't know, it didn't turn out very well. Let's talk about some of the reasons why the GA accident rate is so high. It's something that the FAA safety team, the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee has been working on, trying to find the reasons and the most common causes for accidents. I'm sure you've all heard by now that loss of control has been and remains to be the number one cause, loss of control. And believe it or not, it's day VFR flights. Loss of control in day VFR flights is when most of this happens. Now, it could be lack of training. It could be a new pilot, someone that just doesn't have a lot of hours under the belt. They're working hard on being good and getting better, but they just don't have that window of experience to draw upon when maybe a crosswind happens or a botched landing happens or something like that. So that's why insurance rates are higher for people with lower time. But there's also loss of proficiency, and we all need to think about this issue, this loss of proficiency issue. You could have been a 20,000-hour airline pilot and retired 5 years ago. You're not going to be as good as you were 5 years ago. Let's be honest. So keeping that proficiency up is something that is very, very important. And we shouldn't be doing things unless we're well trained and proficient. Now, I listed a few things here, and I'm not implying that these things are risky things. But if you're not well trained and proficient at these things, any of them become risky, even day VFR flying. Now, seaplane accidents happen. They're not very survivable, but they happen. Formation flying, if that was a risky behavior, we sure would hear more and more about military formation accidents, but we don't, because they train a lot. They're really good at it. And if you're really good at backcountry, then we're probably not going to hear a story about you. So keep the proficiency by training often, much more than the regs require. So what can we do to lower this accident rate, this general aviation accident rate? This is actually the cover photo of an article I wrote in a industry magazine that was published last fall, or last spring, I guess it was. And I titled it appropriately, I'm trying to get people to do a better job at this hobby. The first line of this article talks about how sucking at bowling isn't going to kill me, but sucking at flying a Cirrus is going to kill me. And that's what I'm trying to instill on my customers when I fly with them, is that you have to be good at this because your life depends on it, and so does the life of the people flying with you. And one of the ways we do this is by managing risk. Let's be safer by managing risk. Well, it's important to pre-flight three things: the pilot, the aircraft, and the trip. Right? We can pre-flight the pilot with the I am safe mnemonic. We want to know that we are in good physical condition, mental condition to perform as pilot in command. And if you're not, you have to be honest with yourself and not go. I had a customer that came out to me one day and he was tired, and he said, I don't know why I'm tired, but I brought this coffee and we're gonna fly in his aircraft and have a lesson. And he admitted to me that he had just taken some Benadryl. I don't remember why he took the Benadryl. It's irrelevant. But I realized I had a teaching moment because this customer didn't realize he was a private pilot applicant. He didn't realize that Benadryl is not allowed within 60 hours of the last dose. Maybe many of you don't realize that, but now you do. So we went and looked it up together, and we discovered Benadryl's a no-no. We did fly that day, by the way, but only because I hadn't taken any Benadryl. But he learned a lesson that day that even something as simple as Benadryl is something that's only partly allowed after some time has passed as far as the allowed drugs. Pre-flight the aircraft. This is kind of obvious, but let me tell you, after 30 plus years of flying, I haven't seen it all, but I've seen a lot. And I see people not pre-flighting. And if they do pre-flight, they're not doing a good job. I have seen people walk up to airplanes, get in, start the engine, and leave, and take off. I also found a guy land in a nearby airport. He wasn't on the radio, and when I approached him to indicate to him that, hey, you may or may not notice this or know this, but your radio's not working, he said, oh yeah, we knew it wasn't working. Oh, okay, well, I pointed out how not very safe that is, and but that it wasn't required. And I pointed out to him also that the access panel underneath the horizontal stabilizer in his Cessna 150 was still removed and hanging on by one screw. That tells me he didn't pre-flight that plane very well. And then finally, pre-flighting the trip. This is pretty fun stuff, I think, pre-flighting a trip. You get to start looking at the terrain you're going to fly over and maybe some fun scenery and what airport and the loved ones you're going to visit. But also you need to consider many other things, as you know. The PAVE mnemonic, performance of the airplane, NOTAMs, TFRs at a minimum, and then personal minimums. We teach personal minimums to customers often. And that really goes to proficiency, right? If you're not really good at flying instrument approaches to minimums and you haven't done it in a long time or you haven't done enough of them, have a second guess on how low you should go on that next ILS. We want to emulate the airlines and the charter operators because they are taking these precautions. They are making decisions based on what is safer. Not just because they can or they're allowed to. And finally, I want you to do better than 6156. Anybody remember what that one is? It's okay. It's the one that says you only have to have a flight review every 2 years to be legal. Do you think that the person that had 2 hours in that earlier slide that I mentioned had a flight review? He might have, or she might have, right? 2 hours could have done it, and he was legal, but he wasn't very proficient. So that's why the WINGS program, the way it exists now, is so much better than 6156. The WINGS program wants us to train more often. It's another reason that we don't call it a biennial flight review anymore. We call it a flight review because we don't want to do it only every 24 months. We want you guys to fly more often so that you can be better at what you do. So in the WINGS program, there are, for a phase of WINGS, you simply fly 3 times, and you have 3 lectures that you can attend, and this is one of them, or can be. And you do those things, and there's your flight review. You don't even have to come see me or an instructor because you've already been flying with instructors the whole time. So, by the way, the WINGS program is getting a remodel, according to our program manager at our FSDO, and hopefully that will make it a more user-friendly interface. Let's talk about the decisions that we make when we fly or when we're preparing to fly. We can never say that flying is 100% safe because it's not. Nothing's 100% safe. Only if we don't do it does it become 100% safe. So if I'm sitting on the ground at Phelps Field, I've got 2 runways often to choose from. Let's say I could choose runway 22 left or 22 right. I'm always going to choose runway 22 right because it's longer. Yeah, most of our planes could take off on 22 left, and many do, and that's fine. But if something goes wrong on your takeoff roll, wouldn't you rather have more runway and more overrun terrain before you start running into things? I prefer 22 right. I take the safe choice on that one. Same for landing. What about flight following? It's a great service. It can help you in an emergency. Not only that, it can always be a quick lifeline. All you have to do is push the button to talk to somebody that can help you if you need help. Because if you're not talking to ATC, then you're going to have to look up a frequency potentially or tune it to get help if you need help. And don't forget also, one of the secondary jobs of ATC is to separate traffic, even VFR traffic. And so it's another set of eyes looking at you for terrain avoidance and traffic avoidance. I teach my customers to always, it's my requirement actually, to always call flight following when able. Now granted, there are some times in which you're down behind mountains and you can't do it, but when able, get flight following, please. One of the things I learned when I was in my instructor training, and I probably should have learned this much earlier in my flying career, but is that if I expect the engine to fail on my takeoff every time, I don't really have to think about where I'm going to go because I've already thought about it. So when it does, or if it does happen someday, and my expectation is that it's going to happen, then I'm already looking for a place to land. So another way we can make safe decisions or make flying safer is to expect these things or make these decisions in a way that makes a better outcome or can at least help make a better outcome. Here's another one that I did recently. I was arriving in Spokane after a long flight back up from visiting our daughter in California. And we arrived into Spokane at about 5:30 at night, and we flew the instrument approach, even though it was a night VFR arrival. Well, I didn't have to fly the instrument approach, but I did because it's safer. It keeps me out of the mountains. And I have the approach memorized, and I have all the terrain memorized around here, but it doesn't matter. It was a long day. It was 6 hours of flying to get up here from Southern California. And so I flew the instrument approach because it was the safest thing to do. Now, if any of you have been through your instrument training recently, you would hopefully know when you have to file an alternate airport. For you instrument pilots, the answer is you always have to. That's the regulation. You always file an alternate unless the weather is good enough for you not to. So there's really no reason not to file an alternate when you're flying IFR or anytime, because it takes the decision making out of the plane. It's already been made on the ground. And when you can make those decisions on the ground, if you can, then it allows you to more quickly and expeditiously react when you do need to use that situation. It's just a quick little flight. Do I really need to sump fuel? I've actually had that question asked of me of customers, and I stand there with my arms crossed and I say, I don't care how short the flight is, it's still a flight. You're going to be 3,000 feet in the air. What's the difference? Yes, you have to sump your fuel, but it was in a locked hangar all night. I don't care. You weren't here watching it. Sump the fuel. And if they won't do it, I do it. I have a true story about a customer's airplane that was in storage. It was a community hangar storage situation. And the plane got fueled, got put away. And this is a secured community hangar. And next day the plane came out with contaminated fuel, which was discovered because they sumped the fuel. And then finally, at least have one out. And by that I mean, don't get yourself cornered in a situation in which the only alternative is a dangerous alternative. For example, if your plane has a service ceiling of 13,000 feet and the clouds are up to 12, should you really do that? Because if you go down into the clouds and you pick up ice, not a very good situation. All right, that's the end of my ADM rant. Hopefully it didn't sound too much like a rant. I want accidents to go down, and I want everybody to be a safer pilot. This is where I'm going to start talking about a different way to present weather. Instead of me just talking about weather products that are available to you and how to use them, I thought what I would do is take a real life trip, which I made last month, and use that trip to illustrate how I used along the way the weather products that are available to us and some of the best ones that I think are out there for us to use. So I called this trip my cross-country anti-COVID boondoggle. It had been a long time since I've seen my family members, and my family is spread out, as you can see, all over our great country. This was the intended trip. This is what I planned for. And at the end of the presentation, you'll see how it ended up turning out. But first I wanted to go to Charlotte, North Carolina and visit mom and dad. So with COVID test negative in hand, I departed Phelps Field solo and went there. And then after that, I was intending to visit my sister and her family in Atlanta, my daughter in college in Oklahoma City, my brother and his family who live in near Eagle, Colorado. They actually live in Breckenridge. And then my other college daughter, daughter number 1, down in the LA area, East LA area. So when I have a trip, any trip really, but in this case, this was a big one. This was going to be a long distance. I start looking way ahead at prog charts. And they're really useful tools, I think, because they can show you frontal boundaries and high and low pressure systems. But also for me, what it tells me here is thunderstorm activity and precip. Now this wasn't the prog chart that I used or that showed presented to me for the actual flight. This is just one I picked off the website recently. But I want you to start thinking about if you're using prog charts on ForeFlight and you want to get anything with precipitation on it more than 3 days out, ForeFlight's not going to show it. I don't know why, but the prog charts on ForeFlight precip illustrations don't go past 3 days. But if you go to aviationweather.gov, the National Weather Service, their prog charts do. They go at least to 6 days illustrating precip. And I like that, right? I want to see what the expectation is. I want to see, I can index myself through those charts, and I can see how is the atmosphere behaving, at least on the surface and in a grand scale. It's also really important when you're looking at these prog charts is that you need to check the valid times, right? These things are made at one time, but they're valid for a certain interval. And it's easy to click through the way ForeFlight presents it if you're a ForeFlight user, and it'll just say 18-hour prog, 24-hour prog. And you might think that that's 24 hours from now. It's not. You have to look at the valid time that's actually printed on the chart to understand the valid time for those. So watch out for that. You could be several hours off. So at 5 days, I'm looking at prog charts. And then I'm looking at local forecasts. What's the weather saying? What's the news saying, right? You can look at the Weather Channel. I just want to see what the trends are going to be. Am I going to be looking at rain and ice and snow, or is it going to be beautiful and sunny? That's really about all you can do at 5 days. Then at about 2 days, you can start looking at some other products. For example, well, you can still use prognostic charts, and those are great, and I would continue to look at those. And local forecasts, but there's another way, there's another product out there that's called the MOS. And I've got a little shot there of what it looks like when you're looking at an airport MOS, and that means Model Output Statistics. What the hell is that? Well, it's kind of like a TAF. The Terminal Area Forecast is kind of like an MOS, a Model Output Statistics. However, the TAF is generated by a human. The MOS is generated by a computer. So while, yes, that's true, an MOS is generated by a computer, it is going to show the computer model further out than a human-created TAF. And so as you can see in this slide, I said that this particular MOS image that I screenshotted I did last Thursday at 3:50, but you can see that the MOS was going out to Saturday afternoon of last weekend. And so the TAF would have never done that, right? The TAF is not going to go that far out into the future. So consider looking at model output statistics. Oftentimes it's going to be similar to the TAF, but sometimes they don't agree. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. All right, T-1 day. Anybody remember whatever happened, how you found the tops report years ago? The area forecast, which is now long gone. Oh my God, how do we find the tops? Well, there's this great tool on aviationweather.gov called the GFA tool, Graphical Forecast for Aviation. And I've got an illustration here, and the numbers are small and hard to read, but what they're saying, or what they're showing, if there are clouds, what the nature of the tops and the bottom and the bases are. And I've called out that one that was near there. You can see it's near Spokane. And in this case, on this day, when I took the screenshot, it was overcast at 16,000 with tops at 21. Well, that's good information to know if you're flying in a jet, for example. But it also will show, of course, much lower clouds. It's not just limited to high clouds. It's simply a great tool in which you can get a feel for the cloud tops now that the area forecast is gone. I'd also like to point out on this particular image that you see on this slide, and that is, you can see that I've selected clouds, and I've also slid that little slider bar, that little yellow handle, out into the future, which means I can look at clouds and I can look at the forecast model for what they think is going to happen up to, I think it's 18 hours into the future. And I can do that with clouds, I can do it with visibility, I can do it with icing. You can just choose which button you want to push up there. And you'll find this on the aviationweather.gov website under Tools. And it's called the GFA tool. The AOPA Flight Planner is another great tool. That may be something you would like to try, and they do similar things. And then, of course, your tablet pilot apps. At one day, so we're talking about how now the day before I leave Spokane to go to Charlotte, what am I looking at? Well, I've got a pretty good idea in mind already that what the weather picture is going to be if I'm looking at a prog chart from one day. That's pretty accurate now at one day. Granted, not so much at 6 days, but at one day, you got a pretty good idea of what to expect. Now I'm starting to look at the various imagery available to me on the pilot apps available, such as Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight. Also, National Weather Service, aviationweather.gov. Looking there for current radar even for the day before, forecast models. And now, importantly, I'm comparing weather products to each other. I want to compare a prog chart to this GFA tool showing clouds, and I want to see how they correlate, and if they are telling me more together than they would as each one being independent. I can get a better idea if there's precipitation, but I can also see, well, let's see what the cloud tops are supposed to be in 15 or 18 hours out. Well, it may just be that we've got some high clouds and rain, and that's not terrible if you're going to fly, right? Rain doesn't necessarily mean IFR. It can, but it doesn't always. So you see here, by comparing weather products, you can get even a better mental image of what the atmosphere is starting to look like. T-minus 12 hours. Okay. Now we've got enough. We've got a lot of products available to us that are becoming more and more accurate. There's an app I'm going to talk about in the next slide called Windy, which is a great one. It's kind of like a animated Winds Aloft product. The skew-T diagram, which is, granted, a fairly complicated thing, but if you have just a little bit of education on this chart that you can see on the slide, you can understand quite a lot about clouds and where they are relative to the freezing level. I'll talk about in a moment. The forecast icing potential, or FIP for short, is another good one. You can look up icing in the area where you're planning to go. But let's talk a minute about the skew-T diagram. I mentioned a moment ago that the GFA tool is the way to find the cloud tops, and that is true. But the skew-T diagram is also a way to find the cloud tops. If you look at the picture I have there at the bottom, you see a blue line and a red line. That blue line and the red line, you can see, are joining each other for a little bit, and then they separate again. That is the temperature and the dew point at a particular altitude. That's what that's saying. So if you have a temperature dew point conversion, in other words, zero spread, which is what this is indicating graphically, you can expect a cloud layer there, right? 100% relative humidity. In this case, if you follow the light blue horizontal line to the right, you get 5,000. So that's 5,000 feet AGL of, MSL. That's 5,000 feet MSL, and that would be roughly, in this case, where the cloud level would be expected. You can see that it's also not expected to be very thick because the lines diverge almost immediately after 5,000 feet. So I can look at this chart very quickly and say, yep, there's a cloud layer, but above the cloud layer, it's clear for quite a long way, all the way up to potentially 15,000 feet. You'll also notice a band of blue. The band of blue is bumped up against a diagonal red line that comes off the bottom axis labeled temperature, and you'll see that the bottom of that blue is coming off the 0 degree, the red 0 degree line that's coming up diagonally from left to right, indicating the freezing level. So if you have a convergence of temperature and dew point or below freezing level, you now have the possibility for icing. So you can see that graphically, these charts tell me in only a few seconds that I'm looking at a cloud layer that's below freezing, which would be a potential for icing. And on the far right, it shows wind velocity too, and direction, magnitude and direction. There is much more to know from a SKU-T diagram, and if you're interested, there are some phenomenal courses out there available for us to take and learn. For example, those numbers up in the top right corner refer to convective indices and lifted indexes and things like that that help you determine the risk of thunderstorms. There's a lot to know, and these are really amazing products. And they're all generated by a weather balloon, and there's weather balloons going off every day, 2 times a day actually. One right over here north of Spokane International at the Weather Service's office. These balloons bring a GPS-enabled weather station of sorts to record the temperature and the dew point and the winds and all that, and then it transmits that stuff back to Earth, and computers crunch the number and come up with these models, and they really, really are amazing and accurate. The forecast icing potential should be available on your app. If not, then you could go to aviationweather.gov and look at the expected icing potential for the time and the altitude that you're interested in. Remember, icing is trace, light, moderate, and heavy. The picture above shows a wing on a plane that I flew a few years ago. And we were flying local approaches in the Spokane area in a stratus layer of clouds that was below the freezing level. And in fact, it was freezing all the way to the surface, as you can see. The tops were probably at 6,000 or 7,000 feet. And after several approaches, instrument approaches, practicing, you can see how well the flight into known ice, anti-ice system worked. That's a FIKI system, it's a TKS system, excuse me. That's a weeping wing. But the wingtip, where the light is, you can see how much we would have built up had we not run it. These systems are amazing and very capable. A booted system would have done as good a job as well. Again, we're comparing weather products still. I want to see what the SKU-T diagram says. I want to look at that forecast icing potential and start looking at prog charts along with it. I want to compare and get this mental model. At T-minus 2 hours, here is the Windy diagram, okay? Windy is an app, and you can get that on your mobile device. And I use it because I want to see how the wind streamlines are performing relative to my flight. Now, in a short flight, local flight, not that big of a deal unless you just want to know the magnitude of the wind at 10,000 feet. But if you're traveling across the country, as I was in this case, I want to know that I want to know that I'm getting the best tailwind possible or the least headwind possible. And if I want to divert 100 miles in some direction to maintain a tailwind, I'm going to do that, because after 4 hours of flying, 100 miles is out of the way, isn't that far? Especially if you're going to go from a 0 tailwind to a 20 or 30 or 40 knot tailwind. Now I'm looking at METARs, now at 2 hours, right? I've got some more information I can look at. I can look at radar, I can look at satellite imagery, all available on your pilot app or on the National Weather Service site. Again, now getting much more precision on the expected weather. So in this case, I was starting to look at wind. I already had a mental picture of precip with the prog charts. I'm looking at a METAR for my destination and my fuel stop. And even at 15 minutes, I'm still comparing and looking. I'm looking at now at NOTAMs. I'm out looking at TFRs. What airspaces may I have to fly around? Restricted airspaces or MOAs, radar, satellite, current icing potential. What's it doing now? Here's a great image of the ForeFlight product with the icing layer turned on. It's a great thing that ForeFlight has started to do over the years, and that is allow this layer control of sorts so that I can put radar, I can put icing up on the screen. This is showing radar, precipitation only, not clouds, but it's showing widespread snow in the Spokane area. Now keep in mind, when you look at this radar return, you're looking at a composite image. That means that every time the radar dish swings around, it takes an image of the swath of certain number of degrees. And the next time it goes around, it tilts up a little bit, takes a picture, and so on and so forth. And eventually it tilts all the way up, and then it resets to the bottom. What you see is a composite image, meaning every one of those layers that it took through the atmosphere from the top down, that's what you're seeing in this particular image. But there is a choice. If you go to the pull-down menu in ForeFlight, you can choose not radar, but you can choose radar lowest tilt. And if you want to know if the precipitation is hitting the ground, you can see the radar lowest tilt, and that will tell you, it'll give you a different radar image than the composite view. It'll show you only the lowest swath of a picture that it took. And quite often, I see much smaller or even sometimes non-existent precip hitting the ground because it's virga. It's evaporating before it ever gets that low. And then finally, weather evaluation process really doesn't stop when you depart the airport. It continues throughout the flight. It has to, either with your eyes or with other products available to you. Nowadays, it's amazing. We have XM Weather. We have ADS-B products. 978 UAT is a great one because it can show on your iPad or on your, potentially say on your Garmin 430, if you have such a thing. With the appropriate equipment, you can show weather on board on screens. This picture that I have taken here, I was with a customer doing the iOS into 2.1 at International. And if you look at the FlightAware radar track, you can see that we kind of diverted from that. We flew a little bit to the southeast and went around it and landed no problem. But this was a little thunderstorm that was in the area. Not a big deal, but you could see it, fortunately. But I could also see it on our XM Weather subscription on our screen. And I could also know it was there because my wife was texting me, "Do you see that big giant thunderstorm?" And I said, in response to her text, "What, this one?" And I sent her that picture right there. "Yes, dear, of course I see this one." The tablet apps are amazing. ATC is amazing. ATC, I love our ATC. Love these guys. They're such professionals. Spokane International has some of the best controllers, and I've flown all over this country in general aviation. We have phenomenal controllers. They want you talk to them. They want to talk to you. They really do want you to be on flight following, VFR flight following. And they're a great resource for helping you get around weather or helping you deal with traffic or terrain. So keep in mind there's a lot of great things you can investigate if you haven't already discovered these things on in-flight weather products. And when I lay in bed at night, I think about my flight, and I think about every part of it. I relive that flight. I wonder, and really honestly, even after 30 years, I'm still learning on every flight. And what went wrong? Now granted, I do this a lot, not much goes wrong, but stuff still does go wrong. I still make mistakes, or I say the wrong thing, or I mispronounce something, or whatever. Generally speaking, I fix it pretty quick, but things go wrong, and I learn from those things, and all of us should. There's also things that I learn about how it worked, how the system works, or how I could work the system a better way or more efficient way for myself. For example, I learned recently that when you file a flight plan in, well, not recently, I learned this a few years ago, but when you file a flight plan in ForeFlight, for example, you get your expected route back. Well, if your expected route doesn't match what you filed, and you still have time before your departure, you can amend that. So that for you IFR folks out there, if you don't want to get a full route clearance back from clearance delivery, simply quickly amend your flight plan in ForeFlight with the expected routing that you were given by email. And then you've amended your flight plan to what the FAA has told you to expect. And so this tends to work pretty well, actually, so that now when you call flight for your clearance delivery, you will not get a full route clearance that you're going to be expected to write down and regurgitate. You'll just get depart as filed. And I strive for constant improvement. How could I have done better, and what could I have done better all the time? That makes us safer pilots. And by the way, that picture of a crosswind landing, I just love that stuff. I love crosswind landings. They're so fun. So if you want to learn how to do crosswind landings, come see me. Here's a picture of the way that trip turned out. Believe it or not, I made it all the way to Charlotte, North Carolina. Echo Quebec Yankee is actually Monroe. It's the nearest airport to where my parents live. With one fuel stop in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That was at 17,000 feet with a 25-knot tailwind. My sister in Atlanta ended up going to Florida, so I visited her there instead. That's AAF, is Apalachicola. And then I had a part that I needed to have replaced on my plane, so I stopped in Dallas at McKinney TKI, visited my daughter, went into Wiley Post Airport in Oklahoma City, up to Eagle County, where I visited my brother and sister-in-law in Breckenridge. A fuel stop at St. George, where I quickly got an oil change thanks to a mechanic there. And then down to the Cable Airport in East LA, near the Claremont schools where my daughter's in school, and then Reno, and then home. And I did that in 7 days, 34 and a half hours on the Hobbs. Only 2 instrument approaches, believe it or not. Only 2 hours of IMC that whole time. I did dodge 1 hurricane, which you'll see a picture of in just a minute. And I used over 500 gallons of 100 low lead, and I got to visit my family in COVID country without seeing another human being. It was phenomenal. Now, as I mentioned, I did outrun a hurricane, so to speak. Now, remember, I told you that I stopped in Sioux Falls, and I got gas there. The fellow working the line laughed at me. He said, "You're like the Cannonball Run." He said, "You've only been out of the plane for 15 minutes and now you're back in it." I said, "Yeah, I got to meet my mom in Charlotte. She's picking me up." So there I was arriving in Echo Quebec Yankee, and that little loop-de-loop right there is not my fault. That was air traffic control. It turns out that at the Monroe Airport that day, unbeknownst to anyone because it wasn't notamed, was Donald Trump's son campaigning, and they had briefly closed the airport for any arrivals. And they didn't tell us that, but I found out after I landed that was what was going on, and that's why I got diverted like that. But you can see now what I'm trying to tell you is that you can see that Delta has now made landfall in Louisiana. And there's the beginning of it. Now, I was planning on staying with my parents for 2 days, and after 2 days, this was where Delta was at that point. And it had gone north and then proceeded northeast a little bit, but never really overtook Charlotte at all. So after 2 days with my parents, I took off for Apalachicola, Florida, and really it was no worse than the picture you see in that little caption there. Just a little low, scattered, broken layer, and I was on top and pretty much out of the clouds the whole way down to Florida. And that was the extent, believe it or not, of the cloud flying I did on that entire trip. It was VFR, as I mentioned earlier. So great trip, learned a ton, had a great time with family, got to see everybody who I haven't seen in a long time. And that is my mom and dad, and that is my sister, and that is the Gulf Coast of Florida, which I had never been to before, but it is beautiful, and that is white sand right there. It is beautiful. There's my daughter in school in Oklahoma. That is a picture of the Breckenridge ski area, and down in that valley is where my brother and his wife and kids live. And that was my older daughter in school in LA. It was a great trip. Made a lot of people happy, and I was happy to be able to do it. And that is a picture of me and my airplane that I co-own with 2 other great partners when I arrived in the Monroe Airport near Charlotte, North Carolina. So if I could hear all of you, I would ask you questions right now, or you would ask me questions, but I can't. So,
How do you find the T chart that you talked about?
SKU-T.
SKUTs, how do you find that?
Yes. Okay. Good question. The SKU-T. The question is how do I get access to a SKU-T diagram or a SKU-T product? There's a few ways. One way is to get the app, and there's an app available on the App Store. I don't know because I don't have a Samsung device, but I know that you can get it on the Apple devices, and it is called SKU-T Log Pro. SKEW-T, letter T, LOGPRO. SKU-T Log Pro. That's the app, but you don't have to pay for that if you don't want to. You can go to a website called RUC Soundings. That is RUC Soundings. .noaa.gov, and that is actually the government site, and you can get SKU-T diagram data there for any location or route, for example, that you wanted to fly, and all of that data comes from those weather balloon releases during the day. It's a great product, and it does look pretty ominous the first time you look at it if you've never seen them before, but it is packed with great information, especially even for VFR pilots, because it gives you great information about cloud layers and altitudes.
Okay, well, Tim, thank you very much. This has been a very enlightening experience. Certainly a lot more than I realized is out there. When we think about all the resources that are at our disposal to help us safely execute our flights, our flight plans, get from point A to point B in one piece, boy, I tell you what, there's a lot out there. And, for those of us that have kind of grown up flying the Magenta line, if you will, I think it's really important that we take a look at this material and really continue to hone our skills. I gotta love the FAST program for that purpose. It really does help us do that. One of the most important takeaways is this additional software to help us understand the weather we're going to be experiencing en route, so that we can really extend where we want to go and really do that comfortably, where we have a few issues there we have to contend with. Just want to be able to let you know that Tim is once again down here at Northwest Flight School. Come on down, check these guys out. They've got some great airplanes and some great teachers. A lot of great experiences to be had here. I want to also let you know that Washington Pilots Association's got some other agenda items that we're going to be moving to our next meeting, not the least of which is our board election. And if you have questions or concerns regarding this meeting or anything that you feel like you may have missed, I want you to feel free to reach out to Tim here at Northwest Flight School. You can send us an email. Check us out on our Facebook page. And certainly check out www.wpaflies.org for more information. If you're not a member already with Washington Pilots Association, what a great experience. You get all kinds of access to things like this presentation to help you master your skills, learn more, and go further in general aviation. I just want to say thank you very much for those that are able to attend tonight. We appreciate it. We know that things are a little bumpy, and as soon as we're able to have general meetings in person again, we're going to come right back to it. But if there's nothing else for the good of the order here, I want to say thanks again, and you guys have a fantastic evening tonight.
People already made the comments on there.
Oh.